What's going on YouTube? Welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you are new here, my name is Lexie. Thank you for joining. I'll put my Instagram up above and we can connect there if we are not already connected. But today's video is exciting. I'm really excited to do this video. I've been thinking a lot the past several weeks. I know that this time of year brings about a lot of girls who are thinking about competing in the new year. They have a lot of questions, and I think back to when I was a first-time competitor and before I competed, and I had so many questions, and I can't really think of a video or anything out there that really just runs through all these questions in one spot. So what I did is I put up a question box on my Instagram, and I asked you guys specifically to ask me any questions you guys have, just general kind of, we'll say, FAQs when it comes to competing in a bikini competition for the first time, or these may also be questions that you just have as a newer competitor as well. So if you guys are interested after I finish this video in me doing a part 2 for this video, because I will probably not get through all the questions I got on my Instagram. I got a lot. I was very surprised. I would be happy to do that. So just comment below at the end of this video if you are interested in a part 2 version. But without further ado, I'm going to make this like a rapid fire. I'm not going to go too into depth on all these questions. I'm going to give you guys very direct answers for all of them. And then maybe in a future video, if there is a topic that I could go a lot more in depth on, I'll make, either an Instagram reel or a whole YouTube video on it. So without further ado, let's get to the questions. Okay, so first question I got was, when should I get a posing coach? So great question. If you are a new competitor, I always recommend you should be practicing your posing before you start a contest prep and before you pick out a show. And I'm not saying that you can't learn posing when you're in prep, but I tend to find that the girls who practice their posing well before they start prep tend to look a lot more polished, fluid, and graceful on stage. So if you are looking at competing, I highly recommend getting a pair of heels, getting a posing coach, and posing well before you are starting prep or you are picking out a show. And I always have my link below or my discount code for the Shoe Fairy. That is where I recommend getting a really good pair of posing heels. Okay, next question is, how do I turn pro? This is a great question, and it's funny because I feel like sometimes I have to take a step back and realize that there's a lot of these simple things that a lot of people just don't know the answer to, right? Like when I first started competing, I didn't know how you turned pro. So how you turn pro, and this is specifically, I'm just going to talk about how you turn pro in the NPC, which is, I think it is the biggest federation in bodybuilding that there is. So how you turn pro as an NPC competitor is you have to first compete at a regional national qualifying show. Now, most regional shows are national qualifying shows, but it's always just important to double check, make sure the show you're competing in at the regional level is a national qualifier. And then from there, you have to place top 2 in your open class. And that qualifies you to compete at a national show. And therefore, you go to a national show, and that is where you can turn pro. I highly recommend for any of my podcast listeners out there, because this can definitely get kind of confusing, and I'm trying to keep everything in very simple terms today. If you want a full breakdown as an NPC competitor on all of the national shows that are available to you and how you turn pro at each one, listen to the Pro Physique Code podcast that I am on every week. I am going to be uploading an episode specifically on that here next Monday. It'll be the Monday after Christmas, so stay tuned for that. But essentially, to turn pro, you have to place top 2 in your open class at a regional national qualifying show. That qualifies you to compete at nationals, and then you go and compete at nationals, which are big shows. There's a lot of competition there, and that's how you can potentially turn pro. So that's how you turn pro in a nutshell. And then the next question was, can you turn pro naturally? And I think this is a great question because I know that there is a lot of information out there circulating, like the industry of, can you be successful natural or not? And I'm not going to go down that whole rabbit hole, but I will be the first person to tell you, you can turn pro naturally as a bikini competitor. There are many bikini competitors out there that have done it. And I always just say, if you're going to go the natural route, it's possible, just may take a little bit more time, right? And so I think you have to, weigh out the pros and the cons. Do I have the time? And, if you're trying to rush the process, that's one thing, but it is absolutely possible to turn pro naturally in the bikini division. Now, when we're talking other divisions like figure, potentially wellness, that's a little bit different, but for bikini, it is 100%. It is possible to turn pro in bikini naturally. Don't let anybody tell you differently. It just may take a little bit more time. That's what it comes down to. So the next question that I got was, what is my opinion on natural shows like the OCB? So this is kind of a great segue. So there is specific, for those of you that don't know, there are specific bodybuilding federations that are drug tested and considered natural, right? Now that's not to say that the NPC is not natural, meaning it's not every competitor up on stage is on something. The NPC just doesn't drug test, right? We'll put it that way. Whereas the OCB drug tests, right? So, in my personal opinion, I've had clients compete in OCB and absolutely love it. And so I also think it's a great kind of segue into competing. So if you're looking for something that's a little bit, I don't want to say easier is definitely not the word I'm looking for, but OCB, rewards a slightly different look than the NPC. Usually they'll reward a little bit of a softer, less muscular look, right? It doesn't always require as much muscle as the NPC to turn pro. So if you are looking for something, to start out with, it's a good option. Now I will tell you, a lot of times the OCB shows, there's not as many of them throughout the year, and that is one pro of the NPC shows, is there is one, like when we get in the middle of the season, like there's one every weekend, and probably there's definitely more than one every weekend when it comes to the shows in total in the state. So that is something you have to consider, that there just aren't as many of them to choose from. But if being natural and going up against natural competitors who are also drug tested is very important to you, I highly recommend doing a federation like the OCB. Whereas if you are a natural athlete, but you don't necessarily care against going against, 100% drug tested athletes, well then the NPC is definitely that a good option for you as well. So next question is, what USA pro qualifiers can non-US citizens compete in? This is a great question. So again, going back to the podcast I just mentioned, we talk all about this in the episode that I'm going to put out the Monday after Christmas, which I believe is it's the 1st of January. So essentially, for those of you that don't know, you cannot so if you are not a non-US citizen, you cannot compete at all of the national shows in the US and turn pro. There are only a couple of specific shows you can compete at a national level and turn pro if you are not a US citizen. So those are going to be your Amateur Olympia, your Amateur Arnold, and North Americans. Those are the 3 I know of in the US. Those are 3 national shows where you can earn your pro card, and you don't have to be a US citizen to compete at those shows. But the other shows, the other national shows, you generally are gonna have to be a US citizen to compete and win your pro card. Now, don't let that get confusing. It can get confusing. Again, refer to the podcast on the Pro Physique Code that I will put out on the 1st of January. It's going to be a really great breakdown of all of those national shows and what they require and what they don't require. Okay, so next question is, should my friends come to watch prejudging or finals or both? Great question, and I think a lot of times I'll get this question from competitors. I'm like, hey, should I invite my friends and family to come watch me at prejudging or finals? And it can go both ways. I typically will say prejudging is where the majority of the actual show is going to happen. That's where you're going to likely do your routine. That's where, you're going to see the judges actually judging you and doing the call outs. Whereas finals is typically you're not going to have as much of the judging going on. It's really just where the awards are handed out, and any last minute judging comes into play there too. So it kind of, it depends on what your friends and family want to see. Do they want to see your routine, or do they want to see, you on stage getting rewarded, right? So kind of let that be the dictator of which part of the show you invite them to. I will say some shows, finals can run very, very late. So I always recommend, if you're going to invite friends and family, if the show you think it's going to run really, really late, you may want to invite your friends and family to prejudging. That way they don't have to stay up so late, waiting for you to go on stage for finals. Next question is how often to practice posing and how often to meet with a posing coach. So this is going to absolutely come down to how much you have to learn with posing. Now, I would recommend going back to the first question of this video about hiring a posing coach. And then some coaches, like I know as a coach, I do the posing for all of my girls, and some coaches offer that, but like male coaches, usually you're gonna have to go and find a posing coach to work with if you have a male coach. But I would recommend, when it comes to how often should you practice posing, when you are in contest prep, I highly recommend, I say practice as many times as you train. So if you're training 5 days a week, practice at the minimum 5 days a week. When you get closer to your show day, I highly recommend practicing every day. It doesn't need to be for like some lengthy amount of time. I typically recommend 10-15 minutes is all you need. In fact, I think if you practice for longer than 10 to 15 minutes, you can sometimes start to like get in your head. So I would say 10 to 15 minutes, match it to the amount of time or to the frequency of your training, and this is in prep. And then when you get closer to your show day, I highly recommend practicing every day. How often should you meet with your posing coach? So I would typically say about every week is pretty standard, but as you get more comfortable with your posing, you may not need to meet with your posing coach as much. So I would say when you're newer to posing, it's probably beneficial to meet with your posing coach every week for starters until you get comfortable. Now, when we're talking about how often should you practice your posing when you're not in prep, I would say, if you can stay up to par with practicing like 3 times a week when you're not in prep, I mean, that's only going to benefit you when you are in prep. So next question is tanning provided at shows? Yes, tanning is always going to be provided at shows. So when you pay to enter a show, each show always has a host tanning company. So they'll have their on-site tanning company at the venue. It's super easy. All you have to do is pay for it, obviously. I don't recommend, I've gotten this question every once in a while of like from first-time competitors of, hey, can I just go and get a spray tan the day before my show? No. If you've never competed before, what you don't realize is that the tan, it's very extreme. This is not just a tan that you go and get before vacation to look a little bronze. This tan is very extreme. So I highly recommend, if you're a new competitor or a first-time competitor, do not do the tan yourself. Go through the host tanning company, and every show always provides that. Okay, next question is it best to do several shows close to each other or have several months in between my shows? Great question. I am always gonna highly recommend, when you are prepping, if you have the means to do so, I recommend this to all of my girls. If you can do more than one show, do it, because sometimes, especially if you're a first-time competitor, that first show that you ever do, you're gonna feel kind of nervous, and that's gonna be your show where you really get your stage jitters out, right? And so more oftentimes than not, you're gonna do your first show and feel like, oh, okay, that was my warm-up. Now I wanna do another one. So I would say if you have the means to do so, do more than one show in a season. Now, how far and spaced out should your shows be if you're gonna do multiple shows in a season? Well, you have to be cognizant of the fact that you cannot stay stage lean like that for too long. You don't wanna be sitting like in that level of leanness for months and months at a time, right? So generally, I'm gonna recommend to do shows pretty close together, whether that's, they don't necessarily have to be a week apart, but maybe a couple weeks apart. Now, I do have some scenarios though where I will have girls that compete for the first time and their next show isn't for maybe another month or 2. And as a coach, I can work with that, and we can do a little bit of reverse dieting in between. That way their food goes up a little bit before we go back down into prep for the next show. But ideally, you want your shows to be somewhat close together so you're not having to keep your body in that stage level of leanness for too long. Okay, next question is how to fix an asymmetrical physique. So this is a good question, and I would say I think it's important to do some unilateral work in your training. Second thing is I think it's very important to get body work done frequently, believe it or not, because I find that a lot of times imbalances in our physique stem from just having a lot of buildup in our physique, and so that can be worked out through body work, and that can ensure that you're not building any potential like bad compensation patterns. And then also posing is going to be a great way to posing is an illusion. That's the way I like to explain it. So if you have a severe imbalance in your physique that you're working hard to correct with your training, you can also try and kind of disguise it a little bit with posing. So like in bikini, you can play around with the angles that you're holding your waist, your shoulders. You can play around with foot placement. So that that can also help a little bit if you are working with a little bit of like asymmetry in your physique. All right, next question is, and this is a good one. I feel like this is always something I get asked by like new competitors, is bikini separated by height and weight categories? Great question. As a bikini competitor, you are never weighed. You are only measured by your height. So in a regional show or in an amateur show, right? This is not the case scenario for pro bikini. So pro bikini has no height class. But amateur bikini, you are separated by your height. So for example, when you see like class A, class B, class C, how they're separating those classes is by height. So you'll see when you sign up for a show, it'll kind of say, okay, class A is any girl from who's, 5 foot or below. And then class B is any girl who's like, 5 foot, between 5 foot and 5'2". I'm just throwing random numbers out there. That is how bikini is separated. It is not separated by weight. So you will never be weighed as a bikini competitor, at least for now, unless they decide to change the rules one day. It is only separated by your height. Okay, next question is, what should you always have packed for worst case scenarios? So I'm assuming this is referring to like show day. So what should you pack for worst case scenarios? So I could do probably a whole video on this, and I have a couple of videos talking about show day and like how to prepare, but I would say the first thing that comes to mind, and this is gonna sound so random, earring backs. I had a client not too long ago, her earring back like broke, or her earring or something like that happened, and she didn't had to go buy a new set of earrings. Bring extra earring backs. If you can bring extra jewelry, awesome. I think that's also, something to have on hand just in case. So that's the biggest thing. And then I would say another thing is going to be a phone charger. I don't think a lot of people think about this, but sometimes you're gonna be backstage for a really long time, and worst case scenario, your phone runs out of battery and you can't communicate with your coach. So bring a phone charger backstage, and then also bring comfy stuff to just lay out backstage on, because a lot of times you're gonna be laying backstage for a while, so it's nice to have a blanket or like a yoga mat that you can just kind of like lay on backstage. Okay, next question is, when should I hire a coach? This is my second to last question, and this is a very important one. So I always highly recommend you should not hire a coach in the middle of prep. I mean, there's very, very few circumstances where I've taken girls on in the middle of their prep, but you should hire a coach, in my personal opinion, if you want to set yourself up for success well before you want to start a prep. So the moment you think, okay, you know what, I kind of want to start working towards this competing thing, start researching coaches, reach out to a coach, because a lot of times that there may be some things you need to work on a bit before you start a prep. And one of the things I cannot stress enough, two things. Prep for a bikini competition should not be looked at as a weight loss transformation, right? So if you're somebody who's like, oh my gosh, I have, a lot of weight to lose and I want to, challenge myself and do a bikini competition. If you want to have a good prep and you want to step on stage and be at your best, you cannot treat it as it's, a bikini prep is not synonymous for a whole weight loss transformation, right? Yes, you are losing weight during prep, but you shouldn't be starting prep from a spot where you're having to drop 40 plus pounds. That is not what a bikini prep is about, right? So I highly recommend, if you're going to start, if you want to hire a coach, the moment you want to get into competing, look at coaches, research coaches, start scheduling consult calls, and hire a coach then. So that is when I recommend hiring a coach. And again, bikini competitions are not a weight loss transformation. I feel like that's sometimes something people think, and it's one thing if you just want to get on stage for fun, right? But if you're wanting to get on stage, do well, look like you fit in, you have to treat it, it's a professional sport, right? At the end of the day, I mean, well, unless you're, okay, it's not a professional sport, but you don't want to be starting a prep from a spot where you have so much weight to lose. That's just not going to be healthy for the body to drop that much in one go around, and you're probably not going to feel like you look your best when it comes stage day. Okay, the last question is going to be, when should I sign up for a show? So this is a great question, and this is something I highly recommend, that if you have a good coach, your coach should be guiding you with these types of things. Your coach should be guiding you with how to pick your shows and when to sign up. Now, preferably with my clients, and this is the strategy I take with myself, I don't have clients sign up for a show, and this is meaning they don't pay for the show, enroll for the show until maybe like 2 to 3 weeks out. And the reason I say that is you just never know what's gonna come up up. You know, I think sometimes also what happens is maybe you're not ready in time and you need to push your show date back, right? But also you just never know what's gonna come up in life. There may be something that comes up out of the blue and you have to push back your show date. So you just never wanna be in that position where it's like, crap, I already signed up for my show. So I always recommend waiting until about like 2 to 3 weeks beforehand, because most shows don't have late fees until like, unless you sign up like a few days before. So that's never an issue. But I am gonna wrap up this video here because I feel like it's around the length that I kind of wanted to make it already. So I know there are so many more questions I could answer and so many more questions maybe some of you guys have. So if you'd be interested in me doing a part 2 of this video, let me know in the comments below. But please share this video to any new competitors you may know. If you enjoyed this video, share it, spread the word. I hope that you guys, wherever you're at in the world, have a great rest of your day. Stay tuned for a potential part 2 to this video, and I will catch you guys in the next one.